at this point you have the first very important step, which is of course obtain the Laravel structure using Composer. So once you have the structure, you can open that folder in the location that you selected using your own code editor. You can use Sublime or any other that you prefer. It is your development environment and you are completely free to use whatever tools you feel comfortable with. Now, in the previous class, we saw how we can execute PHP artisan serve and of course having the results exactly in our browser. But how exactly is that we are getting this response right here? Well, we are going to discover that the PHP artisan serve is going to basically use this file called server.php. And as you can see, along any other things, it is basically required, using a required once instruction from PHP, of course, the public index.php file. This is basically what it is going to do. And in fact, the root directory of Laravel for the public execution and the public assets, let's say JavaScript, images, CSS, robots.txt, is the public folder. And there is the index.php file which starts with the execution of the framework. So once it is clear, we can go to the public folder, and in fact there is the index.php file. As you can see, it is the favicon, it is the webconfig, it is the robots.txt, which are commonly used files in the public location of any project, of any web project. So let's go to the PHP file, the index.php. You may know that index means that normally this is going to be automatically recognized by the server to be executed and start, of course, this specific execution of the framework. So here we are defining a Laravel start constant. We are starting the micro time, doesn't matter so much. This is just useful to determine how many time it takes to the framework to respond to any specific request. Here we are requiring the vendor directly and specifically the autoload file. Yes, the vendor folder contains all the dependencies that you have, and the autoload file is going to resolve a huge file containing the definition of every possible class that you may use, every possible dependency, including, of course, the Laravel framework components and so many others. So once you run, as you saw in the previous class, Composer install, Composer has been installing every single dependency that you may need in the vendor folder. In fact, if you check the Composer JSON file, this is exactly the file that Composer checked to determine what to require initially. So it required PHP, it required Fideloper. Of course, this is just a constraint about the version of PHP, Fideloper proxy, Laravel cores, Guzzle to send HTTP requests, the Laravel framework, and the Laravel Tinker. In fact, we are going to be using Laravel Tinker in following classes. Now, every one of those components additionally required and have its own required dependencies. So Composer installed the dependencies and the dependencies of the dependencies, everything here in the vendor. And well, Laravel, what is doing here in the index file is obtaining that specific autoload file to get access to all that definition. So you just need to be sure to import correspondingly the namespace, the definitions of that, and that is going to work for you. Then it is bootstrapping the application. It is just installing the application. You can verify in bootstrap app.php, exactly here, bootstrap app.php. You have some definitions. It is creating some singletons. It is creating some elements to handle the kernel. Then we can use the kernel from the HTTP, which is very important, and from the console for the comments. And in fact, we are initializing the exception handling in case that there occurs something. Then we are using that specific kernel, that HTTP kernel, to well handle the request, create a response, and send that response. And finally, we use the kernel to terminate the execution from that request with that specific response. Now, what exactly does the kernel? Well, it is going to do a lot of things. If you are curious, it is located in Illuminate Contracts HTTP kernel. But if you checked here and you paid attention, it is saying that the Illuminate Contracts HTTP kernel is going to be resolved as an instance, a singleton of app HTTP kernel. And well, we have that class specifically here in our own structure of the framework. So if we go to app HTTP kernel, there is it. If you check the class, the parent class of this kernel, which is Illuminate Foundation HTTP kernel, we are going to check that definition right now. You can see how the constructor of this class, it is eventually defining the application. This is basically the definition with all the configurations, the name of the application, the database, anything related with that is here. And there we have the router. Here we are starting the router. And what exactly the router does? Well, it is basically the map or the bridge between what the user requires, and through the router we identify what to execute. So where are the routes in Laravel? It is directed in routes directory. So well, there is the API routes, the channels, the console, and the web.php. And especially the web.php has a route that responds to the original location. You can see here we are sending a request exactly to the root of our web project, and the only thing that it is doing is returning a view called welcome. And if we go to the views, which are located on resources, views, and coincidentally it is called welcome, well, it is just returning a document with the title of Laravel and of course some stars. Don't worry about that. You have a text saying Laravel and a set of links with useful information for the docs, for news, for the blog, and some others, of course. And that is exactly what you are getting here. Of course, any change that you do here, for example, hello world, so that is going to work and be reflected exactly here once you change and refresh in your web browser. Now, don't worry so much about some concepts. Don't worry about views. Don't worry about routes. Don't worry about kernel, about middleware, and any other components. We are going to cover every single of them. We are going to see how to create it, how to create the routes, how to create the views, and in fact, how to create so many other components. You can so explore the whole structure of the framework. You can see here you have the configurations, you have the app where you have the controllers, you have there the middleware, you have in fact the models, all the concepts that we are going to cover during the course. We can of course specify our own structures, our own models, our own routes, etc. And as you can see, Laravel is just starting with the index.php file, requiring the vendor, then using the bootstrap to finally use throughout the kernel the way to handle the request, return the response, and you can see how we faster started with the index and through the index go to the view and obtain that. So if we go back to our views, resources views, we are going to leave that as it is, saying only Laravel, as you can see here, and we can try to refresh again, and we are exactly the same as before. So at this point, you probably have so many doubts about what are views, what are controllers, what are the routes, what is the kernel. Don't worry. The only thing that you need to be sure here is that you have the structure of Laravel with all that specific components, and we are going to start exploring every of them one by one, and you can see how Laravel is using every one of them to finally return a response to the user. So let's go to the following classes to start creating, exploring, and using your own components that Laravel provides you to start implementing your high-level application. See you there.